Okay, we are now live on Facebook. We are live on Zoom, and most importantly, we're live on Torah Anytime as well. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Please check out Torah Anytime for lots of great Torah content, and thank you for Torah Anytime for hosting the shir, and to all of you for coming. So tonight, we're going to discuss a few things about Behar, Shemitah, and a few other bits and pieces. Lots of good stuff that I saw today that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. Okay, so let's start with the following. The Torah over here in this week's Sedra, we're on Torah's, the Parasha is starting on page 696. That's Parasha's Behar. Behar speaks a lot about Shemitah and a lot about the land, and then you have Bechukosai, which speaks about the blessings and God forbid the curses that could come upon the Jewish people if they listen to the mitzvahs or don't listen to the mitzvahs. And then lastly, we have the Parasha of Erchin, of evaluating if people want to give their value to the Beis HaMikdash. So if you have a look, there's actually a sentence that comes up 3 times, and it's flagged up by the Znai in the Torah. It's flagged up by Rav Zalman Sorotskin in his Sefer. So if you look at page 700, you're looking at chapter 25, verse 25, Chofei Chofei. Ki yomu chachicha, when your brother will become impoverished, and he has to sell off part of his land, and then the Redeemer, who is a relative of his, will come and will redeem this field. So the discussion is over here, again, we're talking about leasehold fields. A lot of these fields are leasehold, and so therefore you can sell the field, but even if you sell the field, it's only a leasehold, so you hold on to it until the Jubilee year, until Yovel, and then when Yovel comes, you have to give that field back. So that's the first time when we say Ki yomu chachicha, if your brother becomes impoverished and will have to sell off his part of his inheritance, part of his land that he's received as a Yerusha, as an inheritance from Eretz Yisrael. Then we get to the next one, which is on the next page, 702. You're on page, you're on Pasuk, Paragraph Hey, Pasuk Lamed Hey. If your brother will become impoverished, and his means will falter, you should strengthen him, whether he is a resident or proselyte, he should be able to live with you. And how are you supposed to do that? Do not take from him any ribis, any interest, and you should be afraid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and make it possible for your brother to live with you, etc. And then we continue on that it is wrong to take interest from your fellow Jew. That's the second time it's written. And then lastly, we write again, we're in verse 39, the same page, Pasuk Lametes. And if your brother will become impoverished and he has to be sold to you, you're not allowed to treat him as a slave. He should be like a laborer, resident with you, and he should work into the Jubilee year, and then he goes out with his children, etc., etc. So you have over here 3 times where your fellow Jew is referred to as your brother. Why are we referring to this person 3 times as a brother? And what's the point that the Torah is trying to make over here by mentioning your brother again and again and again? Here's anything the Torah is trying to say. So Rav Zalman Sorotskin says there is a very important thing to be seen over here, and it is actually a slippery slope that sometimes you see people going through, unfortunately. You start off with somebody, you have people that nebuch, they start to lose their money, and when they start to lose their money, there are those that, first things first, you sell off your assets. So if you have assets and you have financial difficulty, the first thing you'll try to do is, well, look, I got this expensive watch, I have an expensive car, let me downgrade, let me get rid of my car, let me get rid of my extra properties, let me get rid of some of my equity, whatever it is that people are going to get rid of. And it's interesting, you find, I remember years ago, I had this fellow who used to sit next to me in shul in Vienna, not here. And he used to say something like, I would buy this if I had more cash, And I always thought to myself, I used to ask my father, I said, look, the guy's a millionaire. Why does he keep on saying if I had more cash? The answer is yes, he was a millionaire in assets, but he didn't really have any liquid money. And in order to be able to buy those things that he wanted to, he would have had to sell off some of his assets. So you have a guy over here who's macha me'achuzasai. This fellow is starting to become impoverished, and part one of becoming impoverished is that he has to sell off some of his assets. So we tell you over here, ki yamuch achicha, just because the person is starting to lose his money, you should not somehow treat him differently. He still needs to be seen as your brother. Many times the guy who's coming and he's starting to lose money loses a lot of his friends also, unfortunately. And people say that the thing that's so much more difficult than actually losing their money is losing their friends. If you have people that were very wealthy and they had a very highbrow crowd, and suddenly they start losing their money and they can't afford to go to St. Moritz anymore to go skiing in the winter, and they're not going to Cancun in the summer, whatever it might be, and people start looking at them, the same people that were their friends suddenly disassociate. And that disassociation from somebody who loses his money is much harder even on the individual than losing their money, because now they realize all those people that I thought were my friends weren't really my friends. They didn't really like me. They just liked me because I had money. But now that I don't have any money, I'm really not interesting. And even worse is that there are certain people that used to walk into shul, and when they walked into shul, everybody gave them this big shalom aleichem. Oh, the geviras come on in, sit in the front. I'm making up a name now, Rabbi Yaakov, everyone's Rabbi Yaakoving him. You know, if you've ever seen it, I've been there once or twice, and I've seen somebody wealthy walk into shul and people walk over, and you're just getting nauseous from the fact that everyone's flattering him so much. It's horrible to see how people that you think the guy will stab you in the back, you know, at any point in time. But as long as you have money, he won't stab you yet. He's trying to sort of smear himself into you. And then the same person loses his money, walks into the same shul, and everyone's like, just sit in the back and be quiet. Oh, what happened to the whole Rabbi Yaakov business? What happened to the whole Baruch Haba that everybody in the Shalom Aleichem used to get? You're not interesting anymore. Nobody really cares about you. And so therefore, point number one, if the person starts to become impoverished and he starts to lose some of his assets, don't start looking down upon this person, but rather what you need to do is you need to still see him as your brother. Once he's lost his assets and he cannot sell things off anymore, you often get to stage two. And stage two of this process is unfortunately that people have to start borrowing money. I don't have money. So people say, well, you know, why don't you sell off some of your stuff? You might have an extra property, or you might have some stuff. You might have an expensive car. You downsize on your car. You get a cheaper car. I've done all that already. I still need money. So you come to people and you start asking them for money, you start asking them for cash. And at that point, they're already a little bit less interested in you. They're already, you know, this guy doesn't even have what to sell off. Like, you know, whilst he still had a big car and he was able to sell off some of his assets, he might still be treated nicely by some of the people. But now he doesn't have anything to sell off anymore. And now he's coming around and now he's schnorring money from you. He's coming over and he's saying, Clive, I'm in desperate states. I need $5,000. And suddenly you're like, well, you know, I don't really want to lend you $5,000. Yeah. So there the Torah tells you again, your brother's become impoverished. It's very difficult for him. Don't think that just because he's lost his money and he doesn't have any more assets, that he's now not your brother anymore. Even now he's your brother. So whether you have to lend him money or not is a different discussion. But if you do lend him money, you have to lend him that money without charging him any interest. You're not allowed to take any interest because he's your brother, and you have to realize as a brother, that's how you should be treating him. Don't look down upon him just because he's fallen on even more complicated straits. And then lastly, you move on to the last level, which is chiyamuch achicha imach. You have a guy that's become so impoverished. Again, this you have to see this through the lens of the time of the Torah. Nobody sells themselves nowadays. There is no such thing, Baruch Hashem. I mean, in certain countries, I guess there still is. There is, you know, I think it'd be wrong to say that slavery doesn't exist nowadays. Slavery still does exist nowadays, and you know, some people say it even exists nowadays in modern Britain. We just don't get to see it, but there's still people that are being trafficked over from other countries and then being sold into doing things that they don't want to do. So it's not so simple. But in general, we don't know people that have sold themselves into slavery. You don't know anybody like that. But in the olden days, if somebody was in such desperate straits, that was the final thing that they could do to make sure that they still had a roof over their head and they still had some food, then they had to sell themselves. So you'd say, but now he sold himself. This guy really, he's on the bottom rung. He's really, I shouldn't even be looking at him as a peer anymore. Says the Torah, even when he sells himself, he's still your brother. And you need to see him as your brother even when he's fallen upon such difficult times that he's selling himself to you. Says the Torah, you're not allowed to make him work just for the purpose of making him work. So, for example, the Gemara brings about this. If you got you got nothing to do, so you tell the guy, okay, dig a hole here, like what they did in the concentration camps. You dug a hole and you spent hours and hours digging the hole, and then you tell the person, okay, now fill it back in. What was that all about? Why did I dig the hole? I mean, I've seen people, like when people dig the hole, nebuch, for somebody that's passed away, it takes a good 2-3 hours. When you have a hand dig, where people have to actually dig a grave by hand, it takes 2 to 3 hours of a person's hard back-breaking labor to make a hole in the ground that's big enough to actually be able to fit a coffin in there. Now imagine you take that hole, you make that hole, and as soon as the guy goes, shoo, finished, great, fill it in. Why? Why did you make me make this hole then? What did you do that for? For no good reason other than making you sweat and work. That's avodas ovid. Treating the guy like a slave, treating the guy like a servant. Says the Torah, even if you have somebody that has fallen on such a difficult time that he actually has to sell himself to you, you still have an obligation to treat him like your brother. At no point do you have a right to treat this person any differently than your brother just because he doesn't have the money that you have, or just because he's fallen on difficult times. And that's why the Torah says 3 times, again and again. And the idea of brother, also, again, it comes up with ribbis. The idea that people don't take ribbis from family. You should be willing to lend your family without having to get any money in return for lending out your money. Because it's family, because it's your brother. Again and again, we should be talking about, we should be seeing other people and other Jews as brothers. That's a really important thing. And if I were to say this actually specifically now, after the terrible tragedy that happened on Thursday night in Meron, we always seem to look at other people and say, he's not really my type. He's not really like me. That guy's a little bit too Hasidish, and this guy's a little bit too yeshivish, and this guy's a little bit too modern, and this guy's a little bit too United Synagogue, and this guy's a little bit too traditional. There's nobody really like you. We're all very, very different. And so if you have a small group of people that are exactly like you, he's my friend. They're like me. And the Torah is saying, no, we have to start seeing each other as brothers. And somebody sent me this beautiful text that an individual wrote. I think the lady actually wrote it. I can't remember who it was. I could look it up later to see who wrote it. But this woman said, after, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai in Shemayim, he was waiting, they were waiting for, they're waiting for this Hilul of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, and suddenly all these different neshamas come in. The neshamas of elderly people, and the neshamas of young children, the neshamas of a Yerushalmi, and the neshamas of a Breslover, and the neshamas of a Chosin, and the neshamas of a Yeshiva man, and the neshama of a Koile boy, and the neshama of somebody who was a Breslover, and a more Nachman, and a more Mizrahi. Everybody came together, and they all made a circle in Shemayim together to dance with Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And that was the carbon. That was our terrible, terrible tragedy. And that was a terrible sacrifice that we had last week. And when you look at that and you see people and you say to yourself, we all suffered the same fate. And we're all brothers together within this. And it's only during Tsaras. I remember during the time, it's now, I guess, 7 years ago, I think already, when we had the 3 boys that were kidnapped. Gilad, Naphtali, and I can't remember the third name. It was Gilad Sher, Naphtali Frankel, and I can't remember the third name. And there was Yifta. I can't remember who the third one is. But there were 3 boys. I remember when the 3 boys were suddenly taken, suddenly we were all brothers. Suddenly we didn't say, oh, he's a little bit more Mizrahi, or he goes to the kind of yeshiva that I wouldn't send my kids to Tzionis, to this, to that. That all goes out the window. Suddenly you start to appreciate people for who they are. And that's what we're seeing over here. A person, another Jew, has to be seen as your brother. Whether you agree with that person, whether you don't agree with that person, whether that person has the money or doesn't have that money. And even if he has to sell himself to you and you think of yourself, I am the master and he is my slave, he's still your brother. Even in that relationship, he's still your brother. And if you start to look at other people and start to see them as brothers, rather than seeing them as the enemy, or rather than seeing them as people that you cannot get on with, then and only then will you be able to, we'll be able to see each other properly. I recently saw this story. Actually, I put out a children's CD. I know some of you might have seen these CDs I put out for children. And I put this is the most recent one, the most recent one that I put out. So I put this story on there as a very beautiful idea and a beautiful story. It's more a story for the 3 weeks. So I'm just going to tell it tonight anyway. So you had a famous rabbi in Vienna by the name of Rabbi Shimshon Wertheimer. And Rabbi Shimshon Wertheimer was very friendly with the Emperor of Austria. And the Emperor of Austria called him over once and he said to him, Rabbi, I'd like to know, why is it that the Jewish people suffer so much? Why are they still in exile? If you say you're these special people, you're God's people, what are you still doing in exile? Especially because you're such a wonderful people. So Reb Shimshon hemmed and hawed, and finally he says, look, Your Majesty, I'll give you the honest answer. It's embarrassing, but that's the answer. Jews don't really like each other. There's sinas chinam, there's baseless hatred. And the emperor looked at this Reb Shimshon and he said to him, are you trying to make fun of me? That's what you consider an answer, baseless hatred? Are you telling me for that little bit of disliking each other that God has kept you in this galus for so many years? I don't believe it. It's not true. You better come back to me within the next 3 days with a true answer. And if you don't come back to me in the next 3 days with a true answer, the Jews of this entire town and the Jews of my entire kingdom are going to suffer terribly. Reb Shimshon went home. He said, he didn't know what to do. He just gave him a true answer. He said he davened to Hashem that Kosh Baruch should enlighten him. What should he say? And in his dream, he had there was a voice that rang out that told him, Reb Shimshon, don't worry about it. You gave the correct answer. And this individual, he will find out soon, the emperor will find out soon that your answer is correct. Meanwhile, the emperor goes on a hunting trip. And he's going on this hunting trip with some of his servants or with some of his soldiers. And he's running after an animal, and he's running, and he lost his way. He was running around in the woods. He's running after this animal. He lost his way. He can't find the soldiers. They can't find him. It's starting to get dark, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. So finally, he reaches a river. He crosses over the river. He has to take off his royal clothes, and he just crosses over the river in sort of like regular clothing because it's too heavy. He couldn't swim across the current of the river. And now he's sopping wet on the other side in regular clothes. And he starts knocking on people's doors. Excuse me, could you let me in? I'm the Emperor of Austria. You can imagine if a guy is standing there in his underwear knocking in the middle of the night saying he's the Emperor of Austria, that very few people actually had the time of day for him. Nobody was letting him in the house. And finally he says, you know what, the Jews, they do achnasos archim. The Jews, they will take anybody in. So he found a Jewish house with a mezuzah and he knocks on and the fellow brings him in. He doesn't know who it is. And he brings him in and he gives him to eat and he warms him up and he gives him clothes and he gives him a warm bed. And he says, don't worry about it. Have a rest. You can stay by me the night. And he spends the night by this Jew and he thinks to himself, this Jew deserves a tremendous reward for what he did. I mean, he doesn't even know I'm the king. He doesn't know I'm the emperor. And look how he treated me. What a wonderful person. So the next day, he tells this Jew, please, if you could bring me to the royal palace. And the Jew's like, how am I going to get you to the royal palace? You know, the guards are there. They don't like just a regular Jew like me drive past. He goes, watch us. Let's go. So they go, they get into the carriage and he's riding. And finally they get to the royal palace and he sticks his head out. The king sticks his head out and the soldiers see the emperor and they see him on his way in. So they feel like, oh, you got to let this guy in. I don't know who the fellow is who's riding the horse, but it's the emperor in the back. So they let the emperor in. The emperor goes inside, comes back out, and this Jew gets the shock of his life. He's suddenly looking at the Emperor of Austria, and he last night in his own home had the Emperor of Austria staying in his house. And he falls on the ground and he says to him, Your Majesty, please forgive me. I might not have given you the proper respect, or I might not have given you the food that you deserve, or I might not have given you the clothing you deserved, or the bed you deserved. Please, please just spare me. And the king says, what are you talking about? So many people slammed the door shut on me, and you're the only guy that was willing to open up the door. How could I not reward you for everything you did? You're a wonderful individual. What can I do for you? And the fellow says to himself, well, look, I'm pretty comfortable. I got money and I got property. I got everything I need. I'm quite happy. There's nothing I need. And the emperor says to him, really? Nothing? You don't need a single thing? And finally the guy says, you know what? Thought of it. I know what I need. He says, what do you need? He says, there's a guy that comes into our town, a Jew from the neighboring town, and he brings a whole bunch of little wares, mitzias, he calls them, little things that he has found at a cheap price, and he's selling them, and he's undercutting me. And I just can't bear it. So if you could make a decree, Your Majesty, that Jew from the next town is not allowed to come into our town, he's not allowed to sell any of his mitzias because he's causing me this loss, and I'm starting to really get angry with him. I hate the fact that he does that, and I hate him. And the king says, but he's just trying to make parnasa like you are, leave the guy alone. He says, no, that's my only wish. I want nothing else. That's what I want. And the emperor said, okay, I get it. Rav Shimshon was very wise. He was right. You know what? The Jews, instead, this guy could have asked for anything, asked for £1 million, asked for £10 million. You won't need to worry about the stupid mitzias that this guy's bringing in and that he's undercutting you. Why didn't you ask for more money? You don't have to bring the guy down, lift yourself up. No, he didn't do that. And he's calling Rav Shimshon, and I see now that you were right. The Jewish people, unfortunately, don't get on with each other. And I can see if this is how they treat each other, and this is how they behave to each other, then I can understand that your God's not so keen on you guys at the moment. It's interesting. I was speaking to somebody recently. He told me that he had an engineer over. He had the head of United Utilities of the engineering department of all the different pipes and everything. He had a very complicated thing to do with his pipes, and he had the guy over. And this fellow said to him, and this guy, I know this guy's trustworthy because when he says it to me, I know who he is. He wouldn't tell me a story. The guy from United Utilities says, I deal a lot with disputes about different kinds of pipes and everything. But I must tell you, the greatest disputes and the most disputes that I have are in these two areas, Prestwich and Broughton Park. I don't have anywhere else where I get in the entire Northwest. This guy's in charge of the entire Northwest of the UK. And he says the worst disputes and the most disputes, M25 and M7. What does that say about us? Okay, I can understand, you're unhappy somebody else has a pipe and your thing or the problems with your pipes. But if the guy is saying, if he's in charge of United Utilities in the entire Northwest of the UK, and he's telling you that the two postcodes that have the worst fighting about these kind of things are the two postcodes with the highest concentration of Jews in the entire Northwest, it's not good. It doesn't reflect well on us. It reflects very badly upon us. And it goes back to the same idea. Are you achicha? Are you somebody else's brother? Or do you see somebody else just as an intrusion into your privacy, an intrusion towards your money, an intrusion into your house? This guy wants my money. This guy wants to be sold. He wants to borrow from me. He wants to sell stuff to me. He's not my brother. He's some kind of schnorrer. No. Again and again we say, your brother loses out, your brother loses out. Treat him like your brother. Don't just treat this guy like dirt. He's not dirt. He's your brother. He deserves to be treated like a mensch, even if he's so impoverished that he has to sell himself to you. Okay, so that's the first idea. Next idea, very beautiful idea brought in the Mayon Beis HaSheva by Rav Shimon Schwab. Rav Shimon Schwab says the following idea. He says there's right where we are over here on the same page, 702, we are going to discuss lending money on interest. And the Torah says the following. If your brother becomes impoverished and it means fault in your proximity, you shall strengthen, whether he is a proselyte or whether he's a resident, he should be able to live with you. Do not take from him ribis. Do not take from him any interest. And you should be afraid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And God and your brother should be able to live with you. As kasvachol yamana isitin levanesha, you should not give him on interest. Uvemarbis lasitin achlecha, and do not give your food for increase, meaning again interest. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God. Asher Itzeisi Eschem Eretz Knayim, that took you out of Egypt. Losses Echem Eretz Knayim, to give you land. Yes, Echem Elokim, to be your God. So why does God need to tell us over here that I am God that took you out of Egypt? We know that God took us out of Egypt. Why does God need to give us that introduction? So Rashi tells us, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, Itzeisi, this is in Rashi, Pasuk Lamed Ches, Parakov Hey, Pasuk Lamed Ches. I was the one that was able to tell in every single house of the Egyptians who is a firstborn and who is not a firstborn. And it could be that maybe there was more than one firstborn in one house because you had these women that were very loose and they had children with more than one individual, and from each one there was a different firstborn. So in different houses, more than one firstborn died. And I knew exactly who was who. The same thing will happen. The rule is a non-Jew is allowed to lend Jew money with interest. A Jew is not allowed to lend money to another Jew with interest. So sometimes you will have Jewish people that will lend money with interest to other Jews. And then when the Jew says to him, how could you lend me money on interest? It's wrong. The guy says, it's nothing to do with me. It's not me. This is money that belongs to a non-Jew. I'm just the middleman. I'm just giving you the non-Jewish person's money. I'm lending you this money, and the interest is going back straight to that non-Jewish person. I got nothing to do with it. You're not paying me the interest, and I'm paying it to the non-Jew. It's going straight to the non-Jew. I'm just the middleman over here. So that's what the guy would say. Says the Torah, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am God, Asher Yitzei Eschem Eretz Knayim, that took you out of Egypt. I know the difference between every single child in Egypt who is a Behar, a firstborn, and who is not a Behar, who's not a firstborn. And in the same way, I also know what money belongs to you and what money does not belong to you. And if you're going to try to play a game and lend somebody else your own money on interest and then claim it's a non-Jewish person's money to be able to charge them the interest, don't worry, I'll sort it out. I'll get even with you. I'm the one who took you out of Egypt. Okay? So here the Torah tells us this. But the Torah tells you that in two other instances. In the second instance, the Torah tells us this in Parasha Shalach. In Parasha Shalach, when we have the Parasha that discusses the tzitzis. So at the end of the Parasha it says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. We're on page 818. The man Tiskuru, you should remember our system of compensation, do all my mitzvahs, you should be holy to your God. And Hashem I am Hashem your God. Asher Itzeisi Eschem Eretz Knayim, that took you out of Egypt, Liyos Lachem Elokim, to be your God. And Hashem Elokeichem Emes. I am Hashem your God. So there also it brings. Rashi brings over there, and Rashi the Ramas, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, and Pasuk Mem Aleph. Lama Nama Itzeisi Mitzrayim, why is Itzeisi Mitzrayim mentioned? I am the one in the Mitzrayim was able to tell the difference between who was a Bechar and who wasn't a Bechar. Ani hu asid lahafin u'liparim in atoyle kala'ir bevigdo ve'amet chelasi. There was a cheaper blue that you could use that looked like the cheles, and you'd hang it on your begotten, you'd hang it on your tzitzis and say, look, I'm wearing cheles. But you're not. It's a fake. So I am the one that knows the difference between the different people, between the Bechar and not the Bechar, the firstborn and not the firstborn. I will also be able to tell the difference, says Rashi, I'll be able to tell the difference between somebody who is wearing real techeles and somebody who is wearing fake techeles. Lastly, we see there's another time where the Torah tells you, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. I'm trying to remember now where it is. I think it's in Parshas Kisava where we have these things. The Torah, not Kisava, Kiseitze, my mistake. Sorry. And there the Torah speaks about having the right kind of measurements. The Torah says, no, it's not this one because it comes up twice. So it's not in Kiseitze. So if it's not in Kiseitze, it goes back to the Parasha that we had previously in Kedoshim that tells us, Moiz Netzedek Amesek Efaseh Vinsek Yerochem. Here we go. Page 664 in the Art Scroll. Perek Yotes, chapter 19, Pasuk Lamed Dalet. Or Lamed Hey. Oh, he made a mistake over here. Lamed Hey. 35. You should not commit perversion in justice, in measures of length, weight, or volume. You should have correct scales, correct weights, correct dry measures and liquid measures. And that took you out of Egypt. Etc. Why does it say again? Rashi on the top of the page, on page 666, tells us, this is why I took you out of Egypt. Because I was the one, I was the one that was able to tell Mitzrayim between the Tippa Shabachar, the Tippa Sheni Bachar, to tell you who was a Bachar and who was not a Bachar. And I am the one that's going to lipar, I'm going to give a punishment to the person that weighs down his weights with salt to then go ahead and to rip people off. So what you would do is you would take the weights and you'd sort of put them into salt, and then the actual thing would be heavier. And what would happen is you wouldn't have to give the person as much of the item that you were giving him. So let's say you were weighing 1 kilo of meat, but you don't really have something that's even. This already weighs 50 grams before you started. So then if I weigh 1 kilo on this side, all I need to give you is 950 grams of meat, and the 50 grams extra that this side is weighing down because of the salt, I'm going to gain. So says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I know the difference between who was a Bechar and who was not a Bechar Mitzrayim, and I will also know the difference between the people that measure evenly, that measure fairly, and the measure unfairly. And even though nobody else knows, I am God and I do know the difference. So we have over here 3 times the Torah tells you that I was the one that made the difference between the different firstborns in Mitzrayim, between the Jews and the non-Jews, and I am also going to catch you if you're trying to do a shmuchel. So therefore says Rav Schwab, these 3 things are not necessarily the only 3 things. In reality, what God is saying is, anytime you're going to try to run a fast one past someone, you're going to try to fool someone because you think you can get away with it. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God. You will not get away with this. No such thing. But Yitzias Mitzrayim, what was Yitzias Mitzrayim? In Yitzias Mitzrayim, when God took us out of Egypt, it was his galus of emes. God showed himself as being the one and the only truth in the world. Paro says originally, Mi Hashem Ashesh Merkala. I don't know who this God is. I've never heard of him. Who is this God that I need to listen to? And what happens then is you have HaKadosh Baruch Hu showing himself in his grandeur and showing Pharaoh again and again throughout the 10 Makkahs, I am in charge, I am in charge, I am in charge. Don't think that anything else or any other power is in charge. Only I am the one who's in charge. And therefore, Yitzias Mitzrayim coming out of Egypt was a wake-up call for the Jewish people and for the nations of the world to wake up to the truth of God's existence and God's omnipotence. And therefore now we have 3 instances. You have this case of the ribbis where you think you get away with it. You have the case of the person with the weights where he thinks he gets away with it. You have the case of the person with the tzitzis. He gets away with it. And God says you should know and you should understand. You don't get away with anything. There's no such thing in life as I will get away with it. God knows, God sees, and God records everything. And whilst you think it looks like I got away with it, God is sitting there smiling to himself, sort of, I guess, again, anthropomorphism. God's not smiling, but if you understand what I mean, God realizes exactly what's going on, and God says, look, you think you pulled a fast one over everyone. And maybe the people down here who are naive, who are blind, who are able to be fooled, maybe you're right. Those people don't see it. Those people don't see your trickery, and those people don't see the fact that you're a charlatan. But I am God. I do see it. I know exactly what you did. I know exactly what happened. Don't think you get away with it. Nobody gets away with anything. There's no such thing as getting away with anything. And therefore we have over here 3 times the Torah tells us, and this is what the Maya Mesa Sheva tells us. Yitzias Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt, was a revelation of us to know and to understand that there is an objective truth out there. And therefore, once we know there is an objective truth, an objective standard of truth, we have to realize that as much as you think you can fool other people, or you can do other things, and those things are going to get you money, and you're going to sit and laugh at everybody else, that's all where you're at the moment. But God sees it. And God keeps a cheshbon. God keeps an exact calculation. And God says, if you're going to try to look frumer than you think you are because you're putting on tchelas and it's really the wrong color, I know. You can't fake me out. And if you're going to be dishonest in business, I know. If you're going to you're going to overcharge people for what you're giving them, I know. You're going to charge ribbons, you're going to charge interest, you're going to claim it's not your money, in reality is your money. You think nobody knows? I know. You cannot fool God. And the sooner we realize, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, there's nothing you can fool God with. There's no such thing as I'm going to do something or say something and I'm going to pull a fast one and God's not going to catch it. God knows, sees, hears, and understands everything. And as soon as we understand that, and when we understand that, we'll then start behaving differently and behaving in the way God wants us really to behave, and not just the way we think we can get away with things. Okay, so those are the two ideas. I had more to share, but we've run out of time. Those two ideas I wanted to share with you tonight. Thank you again so much for joining me on Zoom. It's nice to see all you guys, and it makes it easier for me to speak the fact that I'm seeing real people. Thank you for those who joined us on Facebook, and thank you for those on Torah Anytime. If you want to get in touch, it's davideisenberg@gmail.com. If you want to get one of my tapes for kids, please get in touch. There's a certain limited amount that I'll be able to give away for free as well as digital downloads, so please do get in touch. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you, Mochi.
Thank you.
And let's turn this off.